Grandma, tell me a story, please. Grandma leaned back in her rocking chair and minimized the browser window. A fairy tale, then. Yes, Grandma, we deserve it. We helped you with the housework this morning and didn't break anything at all, but maybe a little bit, but you don't want to know about it. We also helped Merzik down from the tree, and Misha carried us all back to the place, and Uncle Vidu said that he wasn't angry at all and that the garage was insured. Grandma glanced wearily at the bottle of white pills on the bedside table. There were very few pills left, and there were still 4 days until the end of the holidays. Well, sit down and listen. Grandma put down the tablet and began to tell a fairy tale in a faraway kingdom, in a faraway state. Grandma, and where's this faraway state? I asked the geography teacher, and she asked me. I sent him to my literature teacher. Don't interrupt, Dashinka. The 30th state is a country that was so long ago that no one remembers where it was anymore. So, a wise but old king ruled there, and he had 3 sons. And why did the king rule in the kingdom, and not the king? A teddy bear? You're a fool. You've been told from the very beginning that this is a faraway kingdom and a faraway state at the same time. So, the wise king of the Tridentine state declared war on the king of the Tridentine kingdoms. The king seized the territory, united the lands and executed the losing king, and therefore he was wise, because kings always do this to everyone who said otherwise. You're a fool yourself. Grandma looked sternly at the children over the top of her glasses. You're done. If not, then go outside, and I'll tell Merzik the story. He's quiet and doesn't interrupt me. Merzik, who was rescued from a tree, did not just behave quietly. Tortured by direct childish love, the cat whiled away the time until sunset under the bed, was invisible and inaudible, and moved around the territory only in short runs if necessary. From one shelter to the next, after making sure that there were no children in sight, and waiting for the end of the holidays even more impatiently than Grandma herself. I'm sorry, Grandma. Please continue. Okay, so the king had 3 sons. The elder was smart, did well in school, studied laws and regulations in order to know what the harmonious development of the state is within the framework of the feudal system's market economy. And he was preparing to become the next king. The middle one was brave and strong. He was the best athlete of the state and an excellent warrior and was going to lead the army, and the younger one was a fool. Yes, Dasha Jr. was lazy and stupid. He did not study well because he did not see the point in investing his energy in his studies. He's already a prince. In any case, everything in his life will turn out well. He did not play sports because he had a brother, a future general, who could not be surpassed, which meant there was no need to try. He was not interested in science or art, because he knew that he would not achieve good results either way. And he was afraid that everyone would find out what a fool he was. All he wanted to do was lie in a soft bed until lunch, then soak in the tub, have a good meal, laugh at the jokes of the court buffoons, and spend his father's money buying himself unnecessary trinkets at the fair. That was what he loved, and that was all he needed. The kids were quiet. The beginning of the tale was unusual. And so the old king decided that it was time for the children to get married, because a man is only ready to take up public office when he knows what responsibility is for others, at least for his family. And the king commanded his sons to go out on the porch, draw their bows and shoot each in his own direction, and where the arrow falls, there the son will have to look for his wife. Thus, the old king gave his sons the initiative in their search. No one prevented them from aiming at the wall of the house of the girl they liked. In addition, the king wisely ensured the flow of fresh blood to the royal family, prevented the degeneration of the family, but did not allow commoners to rule the state. An arrow, without pulling a bow, would not fly far, and only people from high society settled around the palace, for whose manners you would not have to blush in front of the servants later. Grandma cleared her throat, and one of the grandchildren, trained during the holidays for a moment. He handed her a glass of water, took a bow. The eldest son aimed at the wind, pulled it up to his aunt's cheek, released her, and the arrow flew into the yard. The heads of the merchant guild. The visionary crown prince decided to secure a financial future. The state at the expense of the pot of the richest man in the country. The middle son moistened his finger, estimated the strength of the wind, pulled the bow up to his ear, and his arrow fell in the courtyard of the foreign ambassador. The future general realized to use the matrimonial alliance to protect his country from attack from the armies. A neighbor. It was the turn of his youngest son, who did not know how to shoot a bow. He pulled the bowstring somehow. He also did not take into account the direction of the wind, so his arrow only reached the stream that flowed down the palace sewer. This stream flowed under the back wall of the palace, so it was necessary to try to get into it from the front porch, but no one laughed, not even the guards, because the clumsy was, after all, the king's son. The grandmother cleared her throat and continued her story. That younger son became sad, twisted, and no longer from the likelihood of getting a beggar woman scavenging for scraps in the palace slops. From the absolute prospect of going down to the stream, picking mud there and then climbing back to the palace. However, there was nothing to do. The youngest son took better boots, put on a caftan, it seems, and climbed into the ravine to look for his arrow. And so he descends the thicket of weeds, pushes the stems apart and sees the frog princess. The children screamed in unison with an arrow in their mouths. Of course not. The French ambassador recently visited the king, so there were no unusual frogs or princesses left in the area. The prince sees a white swan, exhausted. She was apparently flying about her business, but then a predatory vulture attacked her. Vicious claws and teeth in. The grandmother showed the size of the aggressor's claws and teeth. The children imagined the carrying capacity of a flying tiger, estimated the required wingspan, and were horrified by the resulting monster posed a threat. Even for light aviation, in the silence of the fear that reigned, the voice of Misha, an unbeliever, could be heard. Go out into the yard and look into the beaks of the geese, and if you interrupt, you will go to play with them. I'm silent, it's the same. So, a kite attacked a swan, injured its wing. It tried to hide in a thicket of weeds in a ravine, sit out and heal. But the kite tracked her down and attacked again, and then our hero shot his arrow. It was blown away by the wind, and she fell right into a kite and killed it. No, of course, you can't just kill this vulture. But the kite realized that he was not welcome here, took offense and flew away, but the swan remained. After all, her wing was damaged. And then our royal swan stumbles upon her and says to him in a human voice, "You saved me, good fellow. Your arrow drove away an evil beast that already wanted to tear me to pieces. I owe you forever." That is, he did not see the kite with his own eyes and knows about the arrow hit only from the words of the talking swan. In my opinion, it smells bad. The prince generally underwent a drug treatment examination before firing a military weapon. The bear understood one more word, so the swan tells the prince that she is not a simple bird, but a magical one, and in gratitude for her miraculous rescue promises him to fulfill any three of his desires. A smarter prince would probably have refused such gratuitous activities, knowing in advance that everything is free with all sorts of tricky conditions and restrictions, but our lazy and incompetent man refused such an opportunity to push the swing of his destiny in the right direction. I've been dreaming all my life. 1. He ordered a 7-colored flower. 2. He demanded right there, in the stream, to catch and release a pike, which in exchange for his life would give him the ability to fulfill any desires at the behest of the pike. And it was only with his desire that the prince actually ordered a bride for himself, with whom he would not be ashamed to show himself to the Pope. At the same moment, the swan let out a heart-rending scream, a new somersault, and a beautiful girl appeared in front of our hero. In a wedding dress, it's so beautiful that you can't take your eyes off it. It just shines like the sun. And you're from St. Petersburg, but then imagine a 100-watt light bulb. Our hero just froze like a fool, with a pike in one hand and an LGBT flower in the other. And why did he spend a swan's wish on the bride, and not a flower or a pike? Who knows? He probably decided that a warm-blooded creature would understand his request better than a fish or a plant. In any case, The prince came out of the ravine with a 7-flowered flower in his buttonhole, a magic pike formula in his head, and a bride under the handle. Moreover, the bride is already dressed up in makeup, with styling, in high-heeled shoes and with rings at the ready, but there is not a single turn on the dress. Then the wise old king realized that something was wrong and that magical powers had coveted his throne, but what could he do? The king's word was inviolable. He said that he would marry the children, so he would marry. On the same evening, a triple wedding was organized in the palace of the eldest prince with the daughter of a merchant of the richest average, with the daughter of a foreign ambassador and the youngest fool to the lazy, with an incomprehensible rootless girl who in broad daylight. She was walking through a garbage ravine in a wedding dress. The celebration was great, and people were having fun, and I was at that wedding, drinking honey beer. So do you know where this 30th state is located? No, I don't know very much. I used to drink honey and beer in those days, and I still remember the wedding itself. And listen to the previous months, the following ones, as if they were gone. Will you be shooting next or what? We will, of course. At the wedding, the king took a moment and told his sons, the eldest in the middle, to sleep light and armed from now on, because in order for the youngest to become the crown prince, the two eldest had to introduce themselves. But right before the wedding ceremony, at exactly midnight, thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, the window in the sick hall of the palace split from top to bottom, and a huge, tall figure wrapped in a black cloak descended from the windowsill to the floor. This terrible man snatched the bride of the younger prince from his hands and laughed nastily. This marriage will never happen. I will marry the swan maiden myself, and you, an insignificant little man, will never be worthy of her. With the clatter of dishes falling to the floor and guests collapsing on a chair, the man grabbed the bride under his arm, turned into a huge black vulture with a swan in its claws, flew out the broken window, behind which there was no thunder, no lightning, or even clouds. All the swan managed to shout to her betrothed was a short phrase: "Cachet kidnapped me. Help me out, or else, Hannah," already on the other side of the window. So the kite that attacked the swan was Cachet the immortal, right, Dashinka? He is the one. So he wanted to marry a swan maiden, not break it off. Break up, get married, or maybe both. You'll grow up right away, and you'll realize that it's one step from love to hate. And why didn't the prince use the 7-colored flower to bring back his bride? I didn't use it, of course, but I didn't use the flower. Why waste one out of 7 petals if there's an alternative? He stamped his foot, stretched out his hand and said at the behest of the pike, "According to my will, come back to me, my beloved bride," but the spell did not work. Then the prince twisted his goat's face and said at the behest of the pike, "According to my desire, come to me, Cachet the Immortal. But this spell did not work either, because Cachet the Immortal was a more powerful sorcerer than the river pike, and even than the seven-colored flower, which the same pike did not fail to report, sticking his head right out of the bucket with the oar. Then the prince demanded from the cheek that she take him to the palace of Cachet, but this spell suffered the same fate to break through the magical protection of the sorcerer. You need to be stronger than him or at least know his true name. And Cachet, alas, is just a creative pseudonym. That's when the younger prince really got twisted, because he realized that he had to look for the offender in a conventional way. But he could just not look for anyone. It's true, there was no wedding yet. The king's son did not bring dinner together until the grave, so he should not have anything to do with a flower, a seven-flower, a pike's command and his high position in society. Without any responsibilities, the youngest prince should have no shortage of brides. He could easily choose another bride, because of which he would not have to quarrel with a powerful and evil sorcerer. Maybe even more beautiful, but let this Koshi choke on it. In general, you're right. Misha and his father and his older brothers told him the same thing, but, you know, that girl really got into his soul. Of course, he didn't fall in love with her, because he was selfish and could only love himself, but he liked her very much, especially for her ability to fulfill her desire. And then, how is it that his bride is selected right before the wedding by some guy in a cloak to find, punish, and defame? Laziness collided with pride and, perhaps for the first time in his life, gave in. So the younger prince had as much fun as he could at the wedding of his older brothers, and the next morning, as soon as he got up, that is, closer to lunch, he set off to rescue his bride from the clutches of Cachet the vulture. He saddled a faithful horse and set off on the road. No, of course, where did he get a faithful horse? He had never been down to the stable in his life. Besides, the horse needs to be fed, washed, combed, unsaddled, and cared for every evening. We already know that Prince was lazy, and a fool, but not an idiot. Why go to such extremes when you know the pike formula and are able to fulfill your desires? The prince rode comfortably at the behest of the pike on a self-propelled stove equipped with self-loading firewood, armed with a tablecloth, a bio-toilet and a camping shower. And on the trip, he was entertained by a saucer with a filling apple, which skillfully showed 24 channels, including paid ones, which you are still too early to know about. And he either went or took a guard with him. When his father and older brothers realized that they would not be able to dissuade him, they, of course, offered him to take a guard with him, but the younger prince refused. Because the seven-colored flower has no verification of the user's identity, which means that any guard who wants to fulfill his wishes can simply kill the prince and take the flower for himself. prince is a fool, but he thought about it, so he refused an escort. Of course, he told his father and brothers that he would attract less attention alone and it would be easier for him to get close to the enemy. I'd rather keep silent about how inconspicuous a man looks with comfort, riding around on a stove with a shower, a toilet and a self-made tablecloth, and where he went to Cachet the Immortal. No, Misha, Cachet's magical defenses were too powerful. First, the prince had to find out where Cachet lives. What a weakness he has! After all, magical protection should always have a vulnerable place for balance. And every sorcerer. He's trying to hide this weak spot. Therefore, the prince went to the dark, distant forest to visit an old friend of the magic pike, Baba Yaga. She had lived in this world for a long time, so the king's son decided that she might know something about Cachet that would help him defeat the enemy. Grandma licked her parched lips. At the behest of the pike, the road spread like a tablecloth under the stove, and already at sunset the prince found himself in the very center of a creepy thicket, where a hut on chicken legs stood among strangely twisted moss-covered trees. The abode of Baba Yaga. I jumped off the prince of my vehicle, went up to the hut and, since I couldn't figure out the password from the pike, if you turn your back to the forest, I tickled one of the chicken legs. The hut jumped, shook, everything inside was shaking. Baba Yaga leaned out the window to find out who was mocking her so much, but then everything went on the well-worn track. Fire, smells of someone else's spirit. Here, the human cub will devour him, even though he smells like the last banderlog. First, give me something to drink, feed me, warm up the bathhouse, rub my back and put me to sleep. Oh, swallow it later. While the elderly Baba Yaga, cracking her joints, was carrying water for the bathhouse, warming her, cooking her dinner and making up the bed, she, poor thing, washed her face so that she had no strength left to eat the king's son, and was counting on something. And after a long conversation over the plates, he told her his problem, and she decided to help him, otherwise he might decide to stay with her. This was the second chance for the prince to change his fate. Instead of questioning Grandma about Cachet, he could have asked about the identity and motives of the Swan Maiden, but such an obvious move did not occur to our hero, so the swing of fate moved on, and the fool remained a fool. And Baba Yaga told him Cachet's true name. No, Dasha, Baba Yaga did not know him. Cachet hid him very carefully, but Baba Yaga suggested that Cachet was immortal because he managed to embody his death, a physical object, and hide it. And most importantly, he is invulnerable to ordinary weapons. Swords, arrows, axes are like a light massage for him. He does not even notice them, and you can only injure him with special weapons. I know a sword is needed against such a sorcerer, and the Cladinites and the prince thought the same, but it turned out that the Cladinites' industry was not limited to swords against Cachet the Immortal. The most effective are the submachine gun, Cladinites, and Heckler. The MP5 with a telescopic butt and depleted uranium bullets, with a silver tip, is exactly what the doctor he prescribed it against the necromancer sorcerer. Where would the prince find such a weapon? Baba Yaga also had an answer to this question. It turns out that if you make a small detour on the way from her hut to Cachet's castle, you can stop by the cave of the snake Gorinich. He was often challenged by all sorts of knights, so the fire-breathing three-headed lizard has accumulated a large collection of various weapons, and if the prince knows how to please a snake, he will gladly let the king's son rummage through his collection and pick it up. Is there anything on your arm? But the prince will have to look for a pistol, a machine gun, a treasure trove in Gorinich's reserves himself, because the snake does not understand weapon models. Grandma took another sip of water. The next morning, Baba Yaga saw the prince off, and, as befits a wise and visionary witch, she gave him 3 things: a bottle with some strong-smelling liquid, a bundle and a book. In addition, she said that the king's son should use each of these things at the right moment, not earlier or later, the bundle when it was empty, the book when it was full, and the bottle when it's clear. The king's son scolded the old woman for the incomprehensible instructions, but Baba Yaga replied that this was the first rule of witches and merchants. If the instructions were too simple, too many customers returned with complaints about the poor quality of the goods, and he demands a refund under the guarantee. The prince pretended that everything was clear to him now, said goodbye to his grandmother cordially, shook the foot of the hut and set off on the road. And since the magic formula of the pike was still in effect, by lunchtime he found himself in front of a large cave, from which the stinking spirit of an old carnivorous lizard, who had been on a diet of nights for many years, reeked. And at the entrance there was a sign for outsiders. But the prince did not like to read, so he immediately pressed the bell button, and Snake Gorinich did not attack the prince. Of course not, mainly because I didn't hear the call. It's a lizard cave. Where does he get his electricity from? But this did not bother the prince, because he is the royal son, so such little things as the lack of permission to bypass him did not bother him at all. He went inside and, guided by the smell, quickly found the snake, especially since the cave was simple, without branches and turns. Here the snake could not ignore the annoying guest in the same way as you, Misha, could not ignore the dance. There's a sausage around you. Gorinich took a deep breath to roast our hero, and he was about to have lunch with the king's son? Oh, what is Dashinka, for the king's son? It's scary, don't be afraid, honey. After all, he still has to fight Cachet, and then serve as an example for moral conclusions. Therefore, nothing will happen to him now. In fact, he did not even waste a cheek wish or a petal of a seven-colored flower. Instead, the king's son heard a grumble in the lizard's empty stomach, took a bundle that he had to use when it was empty, and he took out an excellent leg of mutton weighing more than 5 kilograms. Snake Gornich did not count on this. Somehow they did not look at him with goodies. He was more used to the visits of knights who were eager to carry at least one of his heads in their yaktash. The thieves, by the way, did not look at Gornich either, because he is not some kind of European dragon. He is an advanced relic lizard who knows that there is gold on his chest. It is hard, uncomfortable and cold to sleep. Therefore, Snake Gornich did not see the point in simple money grubbing, and there was no mountain of treasures in his cave, which the whole district was aware of. But never once did a whole prince come to him to remember the snake, and not just like that, but with treats. And while one head, the hungriest, was roasting a leg of mutton impaled on the sword of one of the fallen knights with a thin stream of fire. Two others, interrupting each other, you asked the prince for the latest news. Fortunately our loafer was a fool in every sense, but he was not a fool at all about social entertainment from gossip. He knew a lot from high society. And he found the machine gun, but, of course, having put enough noodles on Gornich's gullible ears, the prince slowly turned the conversation to the topic he was interested in. He, having lost all three heads from a pleasant conversation, of course, agreed to give the prince a pistol, a machine gun, a treasure chest, and even escorted the prince to that corner of the cave, which served as a warehouse for the personal property of the fallen knights. According to our garbage dump. And then the prince was dumbfounded, because Snake Gornich was a famous knight's personality. He was visibly invisible, and all armed. All the snake knew about the weapon was that if it was in someone else's hands and the working end was turned towards you, then you had to spit fire at the creature at the opposite end of the weapon. But let's not blame the three-headed reptilian. This tactic has ensured its survival for many years, which means it is evolutionarily justified. But the prince had a hard time, because he found himself on the edge of a vast sea covered with soot and partially melted samples of armor and weapons. Here and there, on the surface of this metallic ocean, unique products stuck out, the creators of which decided to conduct field tests of new weapons with the help of a mining machine, and any of them could turn out to be a pistol, a machine gun, a gladient. After all, our prince did not graduate from universities, and he graduated from school solely on acquaintance with the Minister of Education. He listened inattentively to wise teachers, and his idea of firearms was reduced to set on fire arrows. The children were silent, shocked by the grandeur of the picture painted by their imagination. But our hero did not become discouraged. The grandmother cheerfully continued, noticing that the corners of the children's lips had crept down. He reached into his shoulder bag and took out of it the second object of Baba Yaga, a book that would be useful when it was full. This book opened on page 1, and the prince read the title of the instruction manual for the operation and maintenance of the MP5 series submachine gun as Aladdinets. There was a picture under the title, and then everything turned out to be simple at the behest of a pike. Because I wanted you to go crazy sending old fish to dig into the hardware. By the way, my back hurts and spawning is on my nose. Oh, I'm sorry, Grandma, the pike is to blame. I didn't think about it. Fly, fly pedal, through the west, to the east, through the north, through the south, come back, having made a circle. As soon as you touch the ground, you will be, in my opinion, led. I want the weapon depicted in this picture, a pistol, a machine gun, a clarinets, along with everything necessary for its operation, to be on this stone, right in front of me. Wow, what an entertaining thing! And how to use it. Then Snake Gornish fell into a stupor. Right in front of him stands the prince with the instruction manual of a device in his hand. In his other hand he has this device, and at the same time the prince asks how to use the device. The snake had an irresistible desire to make a faceplate, but he had 3 faces and 2 rocks, so the prince was very quickly, with all the honors, escorted back to the self-propelled furnace and sent to the development. Snake Gornish even told him where to go, because what if stupidity is contagious and what happened next quickly affects the fairy tale, but it doesn't happen soon. By sunset, the self-propelled furnace had almost reached Cachet's castle, and our hero the king's son almost figured out how to remove the safety catch from a submachine gun. He was still a fool and therefore asked Pike 7 colored flower to explain to him how. I didn't think to use this weapon. And so, with a creak, the self-propelled stove throws, stood up like a leaf before the grass, like a hunchback horse before Prince Ivan. The prince descended to the ground and was amazed that the road was filled with stone boulders. The wire with thorns was tightened. It was a sinful thing for the prince to turn back, leaving the Swan Maiden in the hands of the Koshefs, and that he still has the pike's command and the stripped 7 flower, the status of the most eligible bachelor in the kingdom. 2. He hadn't gotten to know the Swan Maiden well yet, certainly not enough to worry about her. So maybe, well, this Cachet, was he being cowardly? Miss Hinka, how do you know such words? You're still in the preparatory group. Yes, he got a little scared, but it's understandable. Not everyone is capable of going out to fight a powerful sorcerer. Armed only with the favor of an elderly fish that had begun to wither with flora and a submachine gun from a safe store, But then what made him continue his hike about dashing to three things first. He thought how he would laugh. Cachet was an immortal lazy man or not, a fool or not, but he was still a royal son. If someone laughed at him, he would laugh at the entire royal family, at the dynasty and at the government, and he could not allow that. Secondly, he imagined the eyes of his father, the elderly king, with which he would look the prince who returned empty-handed. But most importantly, he thought of the Swan Maiden. He imagined how she was suffering. No, he imagined her robbing him of his ability to work miracles. If a girl is able to give him a 7-colored flower, she is probably able to take it away even more than by command, by wanting to do something bad, and then he will have to return to the role of 3 contender for the throne, 5 wheels in a cart, and more. Or is she a vegetarian? The kingdom functioned perfectly during the holiday, and no one would ever need it without it. Well, now, perhaps, for the first time in his life, someone needed him. He had a chance to do something important, significant. Making his mark on history may not be God knows what kind of mark, but this opportunity was many times greater than anything that had happened to him so far. And so he decided to continue like this. The swing of fate swung 3 times. And what did he do? Went to attack Cachet? No, of course. At night, looking at him, he ate a hearty meal from the tablecloth, threw firewood that came from the forest at the behest of a pike into a self-propelled stove and smoked. As the old soldier's truth says, but it has not lost its relevance. It is better to fight on a full stomach in the morning and warm, dry weather and as far away from the enemy as possible. So the prince slept peacefully until the morning. And in the morning, after having a good breakfast, I spent another 1 petal on arranging a path through all the barriers and calmly went to Cachet the Immortal's castle, and went straight there. The king's son had a lot of logic. He decided that all his skills would not be enough to sneak up on a magician of such a level as Cachet the Immortal. So there was no point in hiding and sneaking around, and he would still be noticed by Cachet in the night. And if there is no difference, why stuff bumps and leave pieces of clothing on the barbed wire? Wouldn't it be easier to reach the goal in comfort? It's a pity that the forces of the 7-colored flower were not enough to clear a wide enough road, otherwise he would have gone on the stove. He would have had enough left. So he approaches the castle of Cachet the Immortal, and shouts to him from the drawbridge, "Come out, you scoundrel!" And he goes out on the back in the end. Yes. Grimacing, he answers, "You have violated, bastard, the border of my territory." The king's son is already curling up. "Who is here, bastard, who steals other people's brides from the wedding?" And from the hip, Cachet's mud was already twisted at him. He fell to the floor and began to writhe. He had never seen such an idiot who could not hit a growth target from 15 meters from heckler and Koch. Well, he's rolling around, so he's laughing, 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 like a horse with tears in his eyes, knocking on the floor with his fist, shouting, "Who's come to kill me? You should at least practice with the newspaper on flies first, killer." The king's son ignored all these insulting words, calmly adjusted the sight and fired the next burst to the right place, and Cachet died, but not completely, but the bullet in his body greatly interferes with fruitful work. Vital activity. The castle of the evil sorcerer shook, the suspension bridge creaked and fell. The king's son quickly ran inside and rushed to the master suite. He suspected that the girl was not being held in a dungeon. The experience of the prince, who was forced to visit his vassals, allowed him to navigate through a typical castle building, and the prince found Cachet's bedroom without any problems. In this largest bedroom, he saw a huge painting in an expensive frame. An old man in a suit of unusual cut, with an imprint of all possible vices on his face, grinned nastily at the viewer, sporting a hole in his forehead. Then, of course, everything became clear to the prince, because he had been taught this story for a long time in literature lessons. The prince grabbed the bottle that Baba Yaga gave him, in case it became clear. He pulled up the cork and, right in front of Cachet, the immortal, who entered, he splashed strong turpentine onto the canvas from the bottom of his heart, and Dorian Gray, who had spent countless centuries honing his magical arts, again struggled at the prince's feet while his portrait was painted. From the canvas, dirty gray streams of washed off paint, but not from laughter. In general, it turned out that Cachet's nickname was not true. Grandma gulped down the water. The spells cast by the evil sorcerer immediately collapsed, the castle melted into thin air, and the prince found himself right in front of the Swan Maiden. Virgo chose not to ask the faithful. He was hanging around for about 2 days and why he had an empty bottle in his hand. So by noon, the youngest prince, hugging his bride, rolled right onto the stove. They went to the front entrance of the royal palace, and they got married the same evening, as there were a lot of leftovers from the wedding of the older royals the day before yesterday. And for many years, this wedding was remembered by everyone who ate royal dishes, because there were no refrigerators at that time. And the prince lived as a maiden, then happily ever after, the Swan Maiden, who jumped into the highest society of the state in one fell swoop, is happy, and the younger prince, respectively, for a long time. That's the end of the fairy tale, and whoever listened, well done, a good fairy tale, Grandma, but you also promised morality and moralizing. Yes, there is a moral. After the departure of the youngest prince, the father king and his 2 eldest sons sat down to confer. The sudden appearance of the Swan Maiden, clearly a difficult girl who got engaged to the younger prince, seemed suspicious to them all. Therefore, They preferred to protect themselves and amended the law on succession. From now on, the marriage of the heir to the throne with a magical creature forever cut off the opportunity to take the throne for the heir himself and for all his descendants. Since the marriage between the youngest prince and the Swan Maiden, although announced in advance, was concluded only the following evening, this law applied to him, but no one warned the newlyweds about the change in the statute. The younger prince assessed himself adequately. He did not rush to become the ruler of the state, so he was not even upset, but the Swan Maiden almost choked on her own poison when she found out that she would not be a queen. That's how logic and long-term planning defeated witchcraft and magic, and no amount of fate swings could overcome sober calculation. So don't count on miracles in your life, but count on logic and reason, on physics. For math and a little bit for a submachine gun. Clearly, the urchins were digesting the ending. Is it clear, Grandma? What is clear to you, Miss Hinka? It is clear to me that one should not stand in the way of a man who has turpentine in a bottle.